Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really good to be here. And as you know, I love sunshine. And it's sunshiny and beautiful outside today, and I'm really thankful of it. It's just walking around, and I told my son I'm going to put my sunglasses on today for the first time in a week, and it feels odd. I let the sun come out, and I want to darken it up again. But it still feels bright and wonderful outside, and the air is, we're 57 or 8 degrees right now, and it just feels absolutely beautiful. The last 4 days has just been nothing but rain and more rain and dark overclouded skies, and a lot of trees have fallen. Even here on the property, we lost some limbs and saw lots of trees that have fallen, just uprooted because they couldn't hang on to the soil anymore, I guess, because of the saturation level of the rain that we've had. And it has been miserable in the oil field, I can tell you. I felt so sorry for those guys out there on one of our rigs, watching them, out there standing in the pouring down rain, working on one of those rigs. It reminded me why I never wanted to be on a workover rig, because it's miserable work, but they earn every penny they make. I hope you had a good week. It's sure nice to be here for the Sabbath day, and I long to be here every week. I cannot stand to not be here and see your faces. It warms my week up and makes me feel wonderful and gives me the courage to go another week. Mark said our main speaker, Mr. Stanley Roberts. That's just, every time I hear that, I just sort of blush a little bit, because I think, what in the world is this dumb clod going up there and talking in front of God's people for? But I can't believe it. It's been all these years has gone by. Time sort of slipped away from me, I guess, and here we are, seeing the things we're seeing in our news, what's going on in our country, our world. It's sort of dumbfounding sometimes and a little bit overwhelming to see what's happening in a crazy world in which we live. I wanted to tell you a story, mentioned this just in passing. I was reading a book I just finished. It was about a World War II veteran who was shot down in Switzerland. And I've been intrigued by this book because he was a B-17 bomber pilot and one of the crewmen on a B-17. They were interred in Switzerland for about 7 or 8 months through the wintertime, and he's telling this story. I mean, the book is based on his life story, and his wife got a hold of his notes, his diary that he kept while he was in captivity, and she wrote this book. And after his death, she assembled all the information. She ended up going over to Switzerland and visiting the internment camp that he was in while he was there, and she was curious to see about it. At the end of the book, I finished it. I couldn't stand it. I read about 6 chapters the other night and when it was raining outside. And I found out this lady was from Gilmer, Texas, which is about 20 miles down the road from me. And she worked for Upshur Rural Electric Co-op Company. Her and her husband both. Well, we were on Upshur Rural Electric Co-op for years when I was first married, and found out she had gone back to Switzerland with a lady named Lucille Daniel. Well, that was a lady who was the daughter of one of the rig manufacturers in Gladewater, Texas that I grew up, and I actually worked for that company. I found it so amazing that there was these parallels there. I almost felt like I knew the lady because we knew similar people. But I know the book was written in 95, and she's probably long since gone now too. But I thought I'd share that story with you because I was so dumbfounded at how small the world really is. And then she mentioned something in her husband, when he did get to go home from Switzerland, she didn't know that he got released. He actually escaped from that camp and made his way with the French underground back into France, and then eventually made his way, I think, to Britain, and then took a ship to the United States, to New York City, and then he took a train all the way to San Antonio, back up to Dallas, and then back to East Texas and Gilmer, where they lived. And on the way, he met a lady on the train, which was her great aunt, whose name was Shrum. And that's my great-grandfather's name. And I thought, oh man, would I love to ask this lady if somehow we were related. It was so chilling for me to see that name in that book, and I thought that was a fascinating story, and I couldn't wait to share it with you guys and tell you about this book, and I hope to maybe do a little investigation of my own someday. That's not at all what this sermon's about. But, we need to hear some light news, some lively news. We need to hear some good stories from time to time. And I I wanted to just share that with you because I thought it was so interesting. The Ark of God was built of shittim wood, strange name. It was overlaid with fine gold. It had a lid which was called the mercy seat. Upon this lid were two cherubim with outstretched wings almost touching. You've maybe seen those portrayed. It contained the clay tablets on which was inscribed the 10 Commandments written by the finger of God. The ark was carried by the Levites, who were the only ones that were allowed to carry it. And it went before the nation of Israel almost 40 years. They wandered in the wilderness all this time. When they settled down for a time, the tabernacle was reared up, and the ark was placed inside the Holy of Holies. This was a small enclosure inside the tent and in the tabernacle. And once a year, as you know, as we read, on the Day of Atonement, only one time a year, the high priest would take blood into the Holy of Holies, this sacrifice, and he would offer it inside the veil for the sins of the people. This, as it tells us in the book of Exodus, is where God told the Israelites, I will meet with you. I will commune with you. I even like that word better. Above the mercy seat, between the cherubim, which was above the Ark of the Testimony. They called it the Ark of the Testimony or the Ark of the Covenant because it contained actually a covenant that God had made with Israel. The promises that he said he would do if they would obey his voice. And of course, the symbolism is obvious. We've talked about this in the past. The tabernacle was a symbol of God's throne room. I mean, that's what it was. The ark was a symbol of God's righteousness, his perfection, his laws, his mercy, and the very throne upon which God sat. And I try to imagine what that must look like in reality. Of course, it's spiritual, of course. The veil, of course, was what? The veil was like the sin that separates us from God, that kept us away from God. And the high priest, we know, was a depiction of Jesus Christ, who is our high priest, going into the very throne room of God the Father, offering the atonement for sin. Especially, you can see this symbolism in the light of the book of Hebrews, where the Apostle Paul wrote that Jesus didn't go into the temple that was made with hands, but he went into the very throne room of God, and he offered his own blood for the sins of the whole world. Amazing comparison there, revelation to those in the New Testament church. Why follow the ark? The Israelites, to them, this was their most holy relic. There's some interesting facts here that we're going to read in this story today that determined what the ark was made of, how it was fashioned, but also what they did when they followed the ark, and on this occasion here, because they know that it symbolized God's protection, God's provision for them, God's presence with them. If you can imagine a community like the town square had the ark there, town squares are almost an identical comparison with the way the Israelites camped out when they were out in the wilderness, because there were 3 of the tribes on each side of the central area that contained what? The tabernacle and, of course, the Ark of the Covenant. It depicted God's leadership and his divine power over enemies, over the obstacles that they would face along the way. It was the very center of their community in their life. And it judged them, believe it or not, when someone would sin. I mean, he looked into God's law and what God's laws and testimonies and judgments had to say when someone could commit a horrible crime like a murder, or, taken like Achan did, the golden wedge that he wasn't supposed to take when they destroyed a city. And it was God's promises to those who would follow him. I would like to begin in Joshua, the 3rd chapter. This is a fascinating story. It's very interesting. It says in verse 1 of chapter 3 of Joshua, and Joshua rose up early in the morning. I like that because, when it talks about men of the Bible, It talks about Job, and it's in even Jeremiah and David. All of them, they said they rose up early in the morning. Jeremiah was one that over and over again said, I rose up early in the morning and I told you that you were committing sin, or you were committing adultery, or you were being dishonest to God, or you were perverting your ways, or you were committing adultery. I mean, over and over again it says that the prophets rose up early in the morning and warned the people. Jesus was one that would rise up early in the morning, go up on a mountainside and begin to pray, and the disciples would find him, when they finally staggered out and wiped the sleep out of their eyes and realized, where is he? Well, he's been up in the mountain for 2 hours this morning, or maybe all night long on some occasions. It was the habit of God's men to get up early and to get about the business of worshiping God, of getting their mind around God's way of life, and Joshua was no exception. And they removed from Shittim and came to Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and they lodged there before they passed over. This is the occasion right before they're actually going to go into the promised land. They are standing on the same ground that they were 40 years ago, believe it or not. They're at the same place. Now, I looked up in Smith's Bible Dictionary the word Shittim. It's actually, they think, the acacia tree. Not like we would find here in the United States. They have 3 or 4 different types there of species in the Middle East there. But you can imagine an arid, dry climate. And what kind of tree grows in that environment? You can go down here to South Texas and you see they're usually old mesquite trees that can handle the heat, the weather, the inclement weather. But also in the mountainous regions, you can find that, like if you go up into Colorado, up into, Northern California, you find these fir trees. And we know that they took shittim wood to make the very ark itself. It was actually the wood that they used to make the ark itself. And some have speculated that it was a shittim or an acacia tree that Moses actually saw the burning bush, that he was actually looking into one of those trees, and therefore out of it, God told him to take that wood and make the ark and overlay it with gold. Interesting side note. I find things like that interesting, that God would be standing there 40 years later on the very same spot in this same area, which was called Shittim, that they used these fir trees and cedars that came out of that area to build the implements and all that. They built the table of showbread and everything. He rose up early in the morning, as I said, and they were about to pass over. So it came to pass after 3 days that the officers went through the host. Now I'm going to ask this congregation, does the word 3 days have any significance in the Bible to you? Well, of course it does, because I've beat that drum to death about 3 days and 3 nights. The comparison between what is about to happen here and the story of Jesus has some similarities in it. Even the time of the year, we'll see in a moment. But we certainly know that, that God, Jesus said, just like Noah was 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, so the Son of Man shall be 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb. That's how long he was in there. And they commanded the people, saying, when you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, and the priest of the Levites bearing it, then you shall remove from your place and go after it. Time out. I just mentioned here that the Levites were the ones that were to bear the ark. But on this occasion, it tells us that the priest were to carry the ark. So this was on a special occasion. I mean, it wasn't just the Kohathites or whatever they were called that were the ones that were responsible for carrying the ark, but these were actually the priest bearing it, and then they were removed from your place, and you will go after it. You're to follow it. There was to be a sort of preparation. They weren't all just crowd together down to the riverbank while the ark is trying to get across. But here they are, after 40 years, they finally are told we're going into the promised land, and all of a sudden there's a great barrier there in the way, and that's the River Jordan. Now you may think in your mind, well, the River Jordan is about like a creek. And if you've seen pictures of that area over there, it looks like it about maybe 15 or 20 feet wide, and it's very shallow. It looks like you could go down and wade across it, and they actually could at different times. But we're going to find out here in a moment what time of the year it was, and it says that the River Jordan was out of its banks. It's interesting to note when they will say what time of the year that was, and I want to save that for just a moment here. He says, and there shall be a space between you and it about 1,000 cubits by measure. Come not near it, that you may know the way by which you must go, for you have not passed this way heretofore. Here is a, try to envision the scene. This 2,000 cubits is about 3/4 of a mile, 3,000 feet. So you're 3/4 of a mile away watching the ark being borne by these priests as it makes its way down to the River Jordan. They're about to, as I said, they're about to set out on this new adventure, and immediately we have an obstacle to the river. And that must have been 3 long days and nights. We're sitting here waiting. How are we going to get this group of Israelites, what some have estimated to be 600,000 men only, beside the women and the children? So I would estimate that to be 1.2, 1.5 million people. They're standing there on the hillside, camped out for 3 days and 3 nights. And of course, they're anticipating this move into the promised land. The book of Acts, Paul tells us that it is through much tribulation that we are to enter the kingdom of God. It's not an easy walk. It's not, like they say, a bed of roses. It is difficult. So 3 long days and nights they waited. The ark was to advance into the promised land, and it wasn't being led by a military. Notice that, not soldiers. You think they're going in. You remember when they were there 40 years earlier, they were afraid of the giants that were over there across the river. And they came back and gave a bad report, and God made them wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Here they are back again. Those inhabitants are still there. You would think they were going to invade a new land. They would have the army in front. But no, this time, the priest of God bearing the ark. That's odd, isn't it? That doesn't jive with modern military strategy. Let's go ahead here, and it says, you've not passed this way before. Jesus, the Apostle Paul on one occasion said, how then shall they call him in whom they have not believed? If you remember that. I asked the question here, why the priest? Well, the priests are trying to teach the people a lesson. Paul said, how are they going to, how shall they call him on whom they've not believed? And how shall they believe them of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? And how shall they preach except they be sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of them that preach the gospel of peace and bring glad tidings of good things. God is teaching them a lesson by these priests, by the example of bearing the ark. God must go before them. God must go before us as well. And the Ark of the Covenant was going to be in the lead. David said on one occasion, I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I will not be moved. God must always go before us in any endeavor. They were to advance with reverence, we see in verse 4. He said that you may know, that you may go, for you've not passed this way heretofore. And Joshua said unto the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do great wonders among you. They were to consecrate themselves. They were to clean themselves up and to wash their body and their clothes, and they were to fast if necessary, just like Moses did on the days before the giving of the law. They were to come, to make themselves right in the eyes of God and use caution as they would. They weren't to have a flippant observance. The ark was to lead the people, and the people were to follow up behind them. And Joshua spake unto the priests, saying, take up the ark of the covenant and pass over before the people. And they took up the ark of the covenant and went before the people. Interesting here, Joshua is advancing the work that Moses did. Moses is gone now. Think of all the work and all the things that Moses did, the great miracles that he performed by God's instructions of bringing the people out of the land of Egypt, through the Red Sea to Mount Sinai, giving them the law and being with them those 40 years. Now he's gone, and Joshua is taking charge. And the Lord said unto Joshua, this day will I begin to magnify you in the sight of all of Israel, that you may know that I was with Moses, so will I be with you. There it is. He's going to magnify Joshua, make him a mighty leader and a great strategist when it came to military operation. And you shall command the priests that bear the Ark of the Covenant, saying, when you are come to the brink of the water of Jordan, you will stand still in Jordan. As I said, I want to turn here just a moment over to 1 Chronicles. Hold your place here. 1 Chronicles, the 12th chapter. I promised to read this to you, so before I get too far away from here. 1 Chronicles 12. Hold your place here because we're going to come right back. It says, these are the sons of Gad. These were men that were gathered together for David to help him in his army. And it says, these are the captains of the host, one at least over 100 and the greatest over 1,000. These, verse 15, are they that went over Jordan in the first month when it was overflown all his banks, speaking of the river Jordan, and they put to flight all them of the valley, both toward the east and toward the west. So in the first month was when the river Jordan was out of its banks here in David's time. Why is that? Well, I asked the curious question too. Does it overflow its bank all the time? Well, no. There is a mountain up there, a mountain range actually, that goes all the way some 100 miles long north of the land of Palestine. And it's called the Lebanon Mountains. And the word Lebanon actually is from, I think the actual Hebrew word is LBN, which means white. Why would they call mountains white? Because they're 8,000 and 9,000 foot mountains that are snow-capped with snow almost the year round. But in the springtime, when the snows begin to melt, all this water comes cascading down those mountains of Lebanon and down the river Jordan, and it overflows its banks. That is why there was almost an impassable river at that time, because it's all completely out of its banks. So it makes sense, I guess, to see the geography and the timing of the year, which I think, too, is important that it was the first month, because that holds a very significant meaning for me when I read the New Testament of the time of the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and the days of the Passover and that such. Let's see here. I'm going to finish up here, get moving along here. And Joshua said unto the children of Israel, verse 9, come hither and hear the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, hereby you shall know that the living God is among you. This was proof that they were going to be there. You know, God said, told David on one occasion, he said, I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way that you shall go, and I will guide thee with mine eyes. God promises to instruct us and lead us along the way if we will just follow him. Every year we seem to face new obstacles. I do. Some that I thought I would never see. Some new ones I've never seen before. And we are often in uncharted territory, as the Israelites were here today. New challenges, unfamiliar ground. That's why the Apostle Paul said in 1 Thessalonians to prove all things and to hold fast that which is good. He says, hereby you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, and the Pezerites, and the Girgasites, and the Amorites, and the Jebusites. And we mentioned last week the Jebusites were those that lived in Jebus, which would eventually become Jerusalem, actually. And behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth passes over before you into Jordan. They went into the Jordan. Now, therefore, take you 12 men of the tribes of Israel, out of every man a tribe. And it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests that bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth shall rest in the waters of Jordan, that the waters of Jordan shall be cut off from the waters that come down from above, and they shall stand up as a heap, or they will just completely stop flowing. And as I said, you know, this was the first of the month, and it was out of its banks. in verse 14, and it came to pass when the people removed from their tents to pass over Jordan, and the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant before the people. I like to get into the scene here. I guess a movie director. I see these men carrying the ark, and the first one that tips his toe into the water, all of a sudden something begins to happen to the terrain. Some of the scholars and the critics will say, well, it was probably some mountain that caved in and stopped the river from flowing way upstream, and it just so happened that happened on the day that they were going to go across. And so they recorded this, and they made it into a whole different story than what it really was. If that's the way God did it, so what? I think it was divine. I think it was exactly what happened when they crossed the Red Sea. I think it was God's almighty hand and his power that stopped that river from flowing. Now, these people were to stay 3/4 of a mile away from the ark. God didn't even want them to approach the ark. So I have to believe they were downstream looking up and seeing the priest standing in the middle of this river. And all the river just dries up and the water goes on downstream. And they begin to walk across the river in the dry riverbed. It had to have made an impression on these people. And I think about times when Jesus, when they asked Jesus, tell us plainly if you're the Christ. And he told them on one occasion, he said, they really wanted to stone him because he said, I and my Father are one. And they picked up stones, and he said, what is it about the works that I've done that you stone me? And they said, it's not about the works, it's because you blaspheme. And Jesus turned to them and said, and he really sort of shut them up and kept himself from being stoned to death. He said, if you look at the works, even if you don't believe me, believe the works that you've seen. Over and over again, he was healing people. He was raising people from the dead. People that had hideous diseases like leprosy, he was healing them. Blind people that had been blind their whole life. And he'd put his hand on them and they could see, and they would jump and leap and dance. And they were just ignoring all of the evidence that was striking them in the face. And here God again, with the nation of Israel, is giving evidence of his great power. They say there are two different kinds of people in the world. In light of this story, there's a whole lot of different kinds of people in the world. But in light of this point here, there are those that tend to look backwards all the time at the past, at all the mistakes I made and all the fumbling I did and all the failures I've had. And there are people, on the other hand, that look to the future. And I think that we oftentimes spend way too much time on the past and what should have been and could have been, and what if things would have been different, if it had gone my way, and all of those stories. Instead of looking to a God who has a great, awesome plan for us and a power that he's proving right here to the nation of Israel, and that it includes you in that plan, and he is going to do brilliant, wonderful, awesome, powerful things in the future, and you have to set your sights on that. I think that is what he's trying to teach this young generation of Israelites that have come along now, and not to make the same mistakes that their parents had made 40 years earlier. And it came to pass when the people were moved from the tents, they went to Jordan, and as they bare the ark, were come to Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bare the ark dipped the brim of the water. The Jordan overflowed all his banks all the time of the harvest, that the waters that came down from above stood up and rose up in a heap, very far from the city of Adam, and they don't even know where that city's at. That is beside Zaratan, and those that came down toward the sea of the plain, even the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people passed over right against Jericho. And the priest that bare the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the garden of the Jordan. And all the Israelites passed over on dry ground until all the people were passed clean over Jordan. You can see in this story where all the song came from about the Jordan River, crossing the Jordan River, how moving this story is and how important it was to the Israelites to keep focused on God's power and his contribution to their future and his promise that he would take them into the promised land. In the New Testament, I want to go here quickly, Matthew the 27th chapter. We find here another leader that is about to go forward, and he's asking you to follow him. You know, Jesus said on a number of occasions, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He said, my sheep hear my voice. They know, they follow me. On another occasion, he said, enter in at the straight gate, because wide is the way that leads to destruction, but narrow is the gate that leads to everlasting life. And few there be that find it. Jesus said also, if any man will come after me, let him take up their cross and follow me. In Matthew 27, I wanted to read this because it is so powerful, and I wish that some movie director or film producer would actually capture the drama and the feeling of this moment. In chapter 27, in verse 45, it says, the 6th hour, there was a darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Some of them that stood there when they heard that said, this man calls to Elijah. And straightway one of them ran and took a sponge, filled it with vinegar, and put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink. And the rest said, let be, let's see whether Elijah will come down and save him. They taunted him and said, save yourself. And Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. He died. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent, and the graves were open, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose, and came out of their graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and appeared unto many. Now when the centurion and they that were with him, watching Jesus, saw the earthquake and those things that were done, they feared greatly, saying, truly this was the Son of God. This is a monumental step for Christianity. It is actually the only sign, remember Jesus said, the only sign that I am going to give you is that the Son of Man would be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. He had to die. He said, he even told them that I'm going to be lifted up. Just like Moses lifted up the serpent, so will the Son of Man be lifted up. He was the first one to go across this veil, if you will, this separation between physical life and spiritual life. He was the first born among many brethren. He was the first one to be resurrected. And of course, we read that over here just a few pages in Matthew the 28th chapter. Skipping a lot of information here, but Matthew the 28th chapter, verse 18. Let's get back up to verse 16. This was after the women saw him, and the 11 disciples went away to Galilee and the mountains where Jesus appointed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and spake unto them, saying, all power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. Go you therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the world. So Jesus took this step of being the first one to be born into the family of God, resurrected into the family of God, and being He reclaimed his position that he had with God the Father before the world began. But he led the way for us. In Revelation, the 11th chapter, I want to go over here because it speaks of the ark in a futuristic sense, I guess, in a prediction of the future, prophecy, if you will. Revelation, the 11th chapter, down at verse 9. Revelation 11 and verse 19. Revelation 11, verse 19. Just reading into it, and the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come, and the time of the dead that they should be judged, and that thou should give a reward unto the servants, the prophets, and to the saints, and them that fear his name. Of course, giving the time setting here. Small and great, and should destroy them which destroy the earth. And the temple of God was open in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of the covenant, and there was lightning and voicing and thundering and an earthquake and great hail. I want to go back now quickly here, just a few scriptures left here. John the 14th chapter. It's something Jesus said. John 14 and verse 2. I hope I haven't already quoted this. John 14 and verse 2. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. That was the promise that he made to his disciples, and the one that he makes to us as well. I'm going to skip down to verse 6. And Jesus said, I quoted this, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes unto the Father but by me. He's the way. We have to accept Jesus Christ. Down in verse 28 now of that same chapter, as I said, I'm skipping a lot of stuff here about the promise of the Holy Spirit that God would give, that Jesus would promise after his departure. He said, if I don't depart, the Holy Spirit won't come. Down in verse 28, you have heard how I said unto you, I go away and come again unto you. If you loved me, you would rejoice because I said, I go unto the Father, for my Father is greater than I. And now I have told you before it came to pass, that when it comes to pass, you might believe. I believe that's exactly what happened there on the banks of that river Jordan, because God told them what was about to happen. And they told all the people, and they said, follow the ark, and you will find yourself in the promised land. I'm going to close with Jeremiah 3. Believe it or not, there's going to come a time when the ark will no more be mentioned. Now, I know you find that hard to believe, since it's such an ancient and important relic to the nation of Israel. But look what God says here in Jeremiah when he was inspired to write. Jeremiah 3 and verse 16, and it shall come to pass, when you be multiplied and increased in the land in those days, says the Lord, that they shall say no more the ark of the covenant of the Lord, neither shall it come to mind, neither shall they remember it, neither shall they visit it, neither shall that be done anymore. At that time they will call Jerusalem the throne of the Lord, and all nations shall be gathered unto it, to the name of the Lord, to Jerusalem, neither shall they walk any more after the imagination of their evil heart. In those days the house of Judah shall walk with the house of Israel, and they shall come together out of the land of the north to the land that I have given for their inheritance unto your fathers. But I said, how shall I put thee among the children and give thee a pleasant land, a goodly heritage of the host of nations? And I said, thou shalt call me my father, and shalt not turn away from me. I guess the children of Israel, even though they were in uncharted land, as long as they kept their eyes on the ark, they were fine, because they knew God would go in and protect them. The spies that went out on this occasion came back. There was only 2 of them. Remember the story of Rahab? They came back and said, the nations are terrified that we're about to enter They were scared to death. And so God actually put fear into the hearts of their enemies. And immediately, you know the story of Jericho, how the walls came crashing down, and they took Jericho and they began to establish the very nation of Israel that would be there for many centuries to come. I like that story, and I like the way that it began. And I hope that someday you and I will be able to start again with Jesus Christ at our helm.